looks like it's gone up. Hello and welcome to Muse Reads LGBT, the continuation of Heaven Official's Blessing. We'll give a few minutes, I'll give a little recap, and we will continue this story. Let's see here. There we go. Just editing YouTube settings while I wait for it to wake up. YouTube's always a minute or two behind, of course. Let's see here. Hello, Konami. Welcome. Let's see how long it takes Discord announcements to go through. YouTube's been having problems all morning. Right now it's not loading. It's saying that a bunch of data is incorrect or missing because they're having problems, apparently. Just a normal day at YouTube. Hello, Cygnus. There it goes. Now it's awake. Let's see here. Yeah, all my videos say no info available. We can't load the info because we're YouTube and we suck. Oh, man. Hey, Jeff. Hey, Jessica. Welcome. Come on. Load already, video. Lord. You'd think being the biggest video website on the internet for like a decade, they'd have figured this out eventually, but apparently not. Here we go. It's finally loaded. Hopefully everybody's doing pretty well. I'm doing alright. Had a pretty good weekend. Just lazed about. Cooked. Did some cleaning. You know, the usual. Oh, it won't even... Okay, I can't load anything. YouTube's broken. Oh, there it goes. Thank you. Alright, well, that's all I can mess with for now. It doesn't look like, actually, the couchbot's announcing me very fast. Very weird. I wonder why that is. Alas. Alright, let's see. Hello, Flubber Wubber. Welcome. So, we are reading a book called Heaven Official's Blessing. We are on chapter 12, in the middle of chapter 12. It's a big one, so it gets split in half. This is a Chinese web novel. And it is the story of a god of bad luck. A god of bad luck who is, for the past 800 years of his godhood, really had a rough time of it. He's trying to turn things around and help people and, you know, figure out some mysteries. We were in the middle of solving, well, he really just solved this mystery. Finished up the mystery of the bridegroom kidnapper. It is a love story between him and a ghost that we are gonna meet today, finally. It's a very long, epic story set in ancient fantasy China. If you haven't seen the other episodes of this, you might want to jump back and watch them at some point, but it's a very good story. I really enjoy it quite much. I enjoy it. So today we'll probably read a little longer than normal because I've had something come up. I'm going to be running an errand, so I probably won't be able to stream Fatal Frame later tonight, which, you know, it happens, but to balance it out, we'll stream this a little longer. So last time we stopped after they'd solved the mystery of the bridegroom. And Shilian was kind of catching up with some of the other officials, discussing what had happened, and he mentioned meeting a mysterious man in red who had all these silver butterflies, who had helped him at one point during this whole mystery. And everybody who heard that freaked out and said, "Oh my god, you met Hua Chang? You met him?" And that's kind of where we stopped. So he's learned that the mysterious figure who helped him was named Hua Chang, and he's about to learn why everyone is so shocked and afraid whenever anybody mentions this guy, who As far as our hero knows, has just been kind of helpful to him and very nice, but everybody else is terrified of this man. So, Chapter 12, Part 2. A ghost in red sets fire upon the temples. Finally obtaining the name of the red-clothed young man, Shilian was inevitably in a good mood. He smiled and said, "So his name is Hua Chang. This name suits him quite well." Upon hearing his tone and words, all the heaven officials on scene were rendered somewhat speechless. A short moment later, Ling Wen softly coughed and asked, Your Highness, the Crown Prince, have you heard of the so-called 4 Great Calamities? Shilian thought to himself, it's a shame, but I only know of the 4 famous tales. The aforementioned 4 famous tales were highly praised anecdotes of the times before the 4 heavenly officials from the heavenly court ascended. The young lord who poured wine, the crown prince who pleased God, the general who broke his sword, and the princess who slit her throat. So these are all folk tales that are told, who each one kind of corresponds to a specific character in the novel. We don't know who yet, but each of those is like a myth that's been passed on through the human world, and we will learn more about each of the godly figures it corresponds to. So she says, do you know the 4 Great Calamities? He says, nah, I know the famous tales. I know the stories about the gods. Well, the 4 Calamities are stories about ghosts. Of the 4 tales, the crown prince who pleased God was in fact referring to the sudden appearance of Jian Li's crown prince during his martial performance. In other words, one of the stories is about him when he was human. How the 4 tales came about was not particularly due to the heavens, which had more power, but which one of their tales was more profound, spread furthest among mortals who shared their tales with enthusiasm. News from outside the realm was always something Shilian was bad at keeping up with. To say he was ill-informed and ignorant couldn't be closer to the truth. The only reason he knew about the 4 famous tales was because he was one of the 4 tales himself. The phrase 4 Great Calamities was probably the new popular term that came after the 4 tales, but Shilian had never heard of it. However, since it contained the word calamity, it couldn't be anything good. He said, I feel sorry for saying this, but I haven't heard of it before. Might I ask what the 4 Great Calamities are? Mu Qing answered coolly, Your Highness the Crown Prince trained in the mortal realm for centuries, yet remains ignorant of such news. It really makes one curious what you've been doing all this time down there. Naturally, he'd been eating, sleeping, and selling skills, collecting scraps. Shilian laughed as he said, As a regular person, there are many things you could be busy with, and it can get rather hectic. It's not any easier than being a heaven official. Ling Wen answered, The 4 Great Calamities. Please take note, Your Highness. The 4 Great Calamities are the black water submerging boats, green light wandering nights, white-clothed calamity, and blood rain reaching towards a flower. Those refer to the 4 demon lords of the ghost realm that have caused the heavenly courts a great deal of headaches. Mortals, when one walked upwards, became a god. When one walked downwards, they became a ghost. The immortal gods established heaven as their residence, severing themselves from the mortal realm and living high above as they overlooked the mortal world and all living beings. As for the ghost realm, it has not yet separated from the mortal realm. Demons and ghosts share the same realm as humans. Some hide in the shadows, others take on human forms and mix among crowds, wandering amongst them. Ling Wen continued, Black water submerging boats. Submerging boats is a powerful water demon. Despite reaching devastation level, he rarely comes out to cause trouble and keeps a low profile. Very few people have seen him before. Therefore, he's of little concern. Green light wandering nights is precisely the ghost with this low-class taste and is fond of hanging bloody corpses upside down in forests. Green ghost Qirong. He is, however, the only one of the 4 calamities that has not reached the devastation level. Why is he part of it? It might be due to his love for causing trouble all year round and being a huge annoyance. It might also be because with the addition of him, it makes 4 calamities. a number making things easier to remember, so no one bothers questioning it. As for the white-clothed Calamity, your highness might be more familiar with this one. Its name is Bai Wujiang. Sitting perched upon the stone bridgehead, Shi Lian suddenly felt a sharp stabbing pain from his heart slowly spreading through his limbs upon hearing the name. His hands trembled before he subconsciously gripped them. Naturally, he was familiar. It is said when a devastation was born into the world, they would destroy kingdoms and throw the world into chaos. When Bai Wujiang came into being, the first kingdom he wiped out was the Xianli kingdom. So in other words, the white devastation, one of the 4 demons, is the one that destroyed Shi Lian's kingdom. Shi Lian remained silent. Ling Wen continued. Nonetheless, Bai Wujiang has already been extinguished, so we won't mention him again. And even if he still exists in this world, he won't be one in the spotlight right now. Your Highness the Crown Prince, the silver butterflies you saw at Mount Yujun are called Deathly Spirit Butterflies. Their master is the last member of the 4 Calamities, the one the Heavenly Court today wants to provoke the least. Blood rain reaching towards a flower, Hua Cheng. Within the heavenly realm, to become the only one capable of shouldering the title of being renowned, were the martial god Heavenly Emperor and the Crown Prince of Xianli. Although the significance of the two could be said to be opposite of one another, their fame was relatively on the same level. In the ghost realm, the one that could be said to be equivalent in reputation against the 2 gods was none other than Hua Cheng. Aside from him, there wasn't anyone else. In other words, he's the great big diva of the ghost realm. If one wanted to get to know a heavenly official, they needed only to take a walk, find a temple to visit, examine the god's statue, study how they dressed, and what kind of weaponry they carried. With that, one could understand them to a certain extent. If one wanted to understand them more, they need only to listen to some of their legends and watch plays about their epics. What kind of a person they were before their ascension, what they've done in the past. All this information would have been dug out and laid bare. But when it came to demons and ghosts, they were different. What kind of person they were before and how they look, all this information was shrouded in mystery. The name Hua Cheng definitely had to be fake, and his appearance must also be fake as well. This was because the him in the rumors was sometimes temperamental and a disagreeable teenager, sometimes a gentle, kind, and elegant, beautiful man, sometimes a gorgeous female ghost with a poisonous heart. There was no end to what was said about him. His actual appearance, the only definite thing was, he was clad entirely in red, and would often appear with a rain of blood and foul winds as silver butterflies chased his lapel and sleeves. As for his birth, there were even more versions of it. Some said he was a deformed child born without a right eye, who had been bullied and humiliated from childhood and thus hated the world. Some said he was a young soldier who died fighting for his ancient kingdom, and his soul had not been resigned to such a fate. There was also one that said he became a sentimental fool due to the pain of his beloved passing away. Yet another which said he was a monster. The oddest version, it was said, and it was really just a rumor, but it was said Hua Cheng was actually a heavenly official who'd ascended. However, after he ascended, he jumped down himself and degraded to a ghost. But that was just a legend, which was not circulated very much, so whether it was true or not was unknown, and few believed it. However, even if it was true, it still had to be false. It was a humiliation to the heavens for there to be someone in this world who was willing to give up being a god and preferred to jump down and be a ghost. In short, the more people discussed about him, the more muddled and confusing it became, and the more mysterious everything becomes. Hello, folks joining us. Welcome. We're finally getting to know about our mysterious future boyfriend. As for why all the heavenly officials were especially afraid of Hua Cheng, there were many reasons. For example, his dark or light nature was undetermined. Sometimes he was cruel and fond of killing. Sometimes he strangely committed benevolent acts. Another reason was how enormous his power in the mortal realm was and how many worshippers he had. That's right, people prayed to the gods, praying for their blessings and protection in order to be far away from the onslaught of demons and ghosts. So heavenly officials had worshippers. However, Hua Cheng, a ghost, actually also had a large number of worshippers. It was almost at the point where he had enough power to cover the skies with a single hand. Even if it was true, it had to be false. Yeah, I think that means that even if that's really what happened, the heavens aren't going to admit to it because it's too embarrassing for them to admit that there is a ghost who chose to not be a god, rather. He didn't want to be a god. I think it's like, even if it's true, we won't admit it. You know, it's phrased a little weirdly, but yeah. By now, an explanation was required. When Hua Cheng first emerged, he did something extremely famous. He openly invited 35 heavenly officials to a fight. The invitation content was that he would fight the martial gods in martial arts and the literature gods in debating. Within those 35 heaven officials, there had been 33 of them who felt it was ridiculous, but they'd all been infuriated by his provoking and accepted the challenge. They prepared to join hands and teach the ghost a lesson. The first one to compete with him had been the martial gods. Martial gods were the heaven's strongest gods. Each one of them had a high number of worshippers, and their spiritual power was outstanding. Fighting an insignificant novice ghost was something just a grasp away from victory. But who would have expected that one battle would end in a complete wipeout? Even their godly weapons were crushed to powder by Hua Cheng's extremely strange curved sword. Only after the fight did they find out Hua Cheng had come from Tonglu Mountain. Tonglu Mountain was a volcano, but that wasn't the important point. The important point was there was a city within it called Goo City. What kind of name was Goo City? It was not a city where everyone raises goo, for that city was itself a large-scale goo poison. I'm guessing goo is some kind of... Here, let's check what this says. It says, click to Wikipedia page. What's that? For more info, check. What does that mean? Okay, I don't know. The guide, it says to check Wikipedia. It's some kind of poison, I guess. Every 100 years, 10,000 ghosts would gather and kill each other, killing only until one of them remained, which completed the goo. What is the goo? I guess it's a challenge? I know what they're talking about, I just don't know what the phrase means. Many times, the result would be not a single one remained. However, as long as even a single one survived, it would become the devil incarnate. In the past several hundred years, Goo City only had 2 ghosts that remained at the end of the fight. And those two, as expected, both became ghost kings, known by everyone in the mortal realm. Hua Cheng was one of them. Okay, so to clear that up, there's a place, it's a volcano, and like every 100 years, all the most badass ghosts go there and fight to the death. And the last one to remain standing, I guess, like, absorbs all the power and becomes super ultra badass. Hua Cheng is one of the 2 that have managed to do that. The martial gods had been utterly defeated. It was now the literature gods' turn. If they couldn't beat him in a fight, they should at least be able to beat him in debating, right? Unfortunately for them, they couldn't win that either. Hua Cheng had traversed the heaven and earth and could speak of the past and debate the current. He occasionally educated them, was occasionally malicious, occasionally unyielding, crafty, insightful, sophistic, and occasionally set traps. It was a watertight debate, sharp and eloquent. He quoted evidence as backup, deluded people with lies, and attacked wherever he pleased. Several literature gods were scolded by him from the skies to the earth, from ancient times to the present. They were so angered they could cough up blood and have it reach the clouded firmament. Hua Cheng became famous in a single battle. However, if it had just been that would not have been enough to call him frightening. What was frightening was that after that overwhelming victory, he had requested the 33 heavenly officials to fulfill their promise. Before the challenge, both sides had made an agreement. If Hua Cheng lost, he would offer up his ashes. If the heavenly officials lost, they would all voluntarily jump down from the heavens and become ordinary people from now on. If Hua Cheng hadn't acted so arrogant with such severe stakes, and with how the 33 believed there was no way they'd be defeated, they wouldn't have agreed to fight and debate with him. All the ghosts get together for a vor party? Yeah, that's basically the volcano. However, there wasn't a single heaven official who fulfilled their promise. Although going back on the promise was humiliating, Thinking on it, there were 33 who had lost. If only one lost, naturally it would be humiliating. But with so many of them together, it wasn't humiliating at all. They could even tease each other about it. As such, they reached a tacit understanding. They would all pretend this had never happened. In any case, people were forgetful, and in another 50 years, perhaps no one would remember it. They calculated the point pretty well, but the thing they didn't take into calculation was that Hua Cheng was not so easily dealt with. Not fulfilling your promise? Okay. He could help out. As such, he burned down all the temples of these 33 officials in the human realm. This was the nightmare the immortal gods now talked about with pale faces. A ghost in red setting fire upon 33 military and civil temples. The temples and worshippers were a heavenly official's greatest source of spiritual power. With their palace halls gone, where would their worshippers go to pray? And where would their incense come from? With their strength greatly injured, to rebuild their temples they'd need a minimum of 100 years to recover, and even then they may not recover their former strength. To the heavenly officials, this was a devastating disaster that was even more frightening than a tribulation. The stronger of the 33 heavenly officials had a couple thousand temples, the weaker ones a couple hundred. Added all together, there would be more than 10,000 temples. But Hua Cheng burned everything down in a single night. No one knew how he'd done it, but he'd accomplished it. It was simply insane. The heaven officials complained tearfully to Jun Wu, but he was also helpless, and there wasn't anything he could do. The challenge had been something the heavenly officials had agreed to, and the promises had also been made by themselves. Hua Cheng had been very crafty. He only destroyed the temples and didn't harm anyone. This was all equal to him digging a hole, asking if the gods would jump into it. Then the gods chose to dig the hole even deeper before plunging in themselves. So as matters stood, what could be done? Those 33 heavenly officials had wanted to defeat that arrogant little ghost in front of the entire world. So they'd chosen to hold the martial and literature competition in the dreams of many lords and nobles of the mortal realms. The purpose had been to display their godly power in front of their worshippers. Who would have expected they would show to the nobles and lords their utterly defeated appearances? As such, after the dream, many lords chose to stop praying to the officials and switched to praying to ghosts. These 33 heavenly officials lost their worshippers in temples and gradually vanished without a trace. The numerous vacancies were finally filled up when a new generation of officials ascended. So in other words, he did something really badass and technically legal, so they couldn't really go after him to punish him for it, because the gods agreed. They just didn't think they'd lose. From then on, whenever the name Hua Cheng was mentioned in the mortal realm, many officials would tremble in fear. Even just hearing red clothes and silver butterflies would make their hair stand on end. Some were afraid of irritating him or making him unhappy, because then he would come challenge them and burn down their temples. Some were afraid because he had blackmail on them and they weren't able to move against him. Some were afraid because Hua Cheng had the power to cover the sky with his hand in the mortal world. So sometimes when the heavenly officials had something to do there, they had no choice but to find and ask him to guide them. After this went on for a while, a portion of the heavenly officials also became his worshippers due to his strange mentality. As such, the heaven's attitude towards this person was hate, fear, and respect all at once. And within those 35 heavenly officials, the two who had not taken up the challenge were martial gods Zhua Zhen's general Mu Qing and Nan Yang's general Feng Xin. So the two people who used to be friends with our main character that are not really his friends anymore, they were part of the challenge, and they're the only two who did not agree. They had not taken up the challenge, but it had not been out of fear of Hua Cheng. They simply had not paid attention to him and felt it was unnecessary and had not agreed to fight. Who would have expected that this was a lucky and incomparably wise decision? However, just because they did not fight him, it did not mean Hua Cheng had forgotten about them. While they were out on the Ghost Festival doing an inspection tour, they bumped into each other and fought many times. Thus, Feng Xin and Mu Qing both had a physiological shadow left behind in their hearts due to the frantic devastation of those silver butterflies. Yeah, some of the gods straight up started worshipping Hua Cheng. He's that badass. And he's that powerful. Despite listening to all of this, Leon's brain was still full of those silver butterflies, sparkling and translucent, while cutely and cheerfully flying around him. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't connect them to the ones in the rumors. He couldn't help but think to himself, are those silver butterflies really that frightening? They're not that bad. They're pretty cute. Local god too gay to function cannot listen to everyone's warnings about a dangerous ghost. They're all standing around him like, oh my god, he destroyed so many people, he's so badass and dangerous, you should stay away from him. And he's like, they were pretty. I love it. I love him so much. Oh man. So that was chapter 12, which basically the whole latter half of chapter 12 is just giving some historical context to who Hua Cheng is and why everyone's so frightened of him. And so now the question is, why is he showing up to help out Shi Lian? Why did he help out? You know? Alright. Chapter 13. Clothes redder than maple, skin as white as snow. Of course, this was something he would never say out loud. However, it was no wonder that Nan Fang and Fu Yao's complexions changed the moment they heard him mention the silver butterflies. It could be assumed they had also suffered at the hand of the silver butterflies' master, along with the two generals they served. A heavenly official asked, Your Highness the Crown Prince, you encountered Hua Cheng? What did he do to you? Was given a full lecture on why they're dangerous. But they're cute! Yeah, that's basically him. Is Hua Cheng the future husband to the protagonist? Yes. Yes, and that's not a spoiler, because literally the description of the story is he falls in love with a badass ghost. So yes, that's what we're setting up for. This kind of tone sounded like he was asking, did you lose an arm or a leg? Shi Lian said, he didn't do anything, just... When he spoke up at that point, he was actually somewhat without words. Shi Lian began to ponder in his head. Only what? It wasn't like he could say he robbed my sedan, then held my hand and led me along the way. After falling silent for a moment, he could only say, he destroyed the bewildering array of the female ghosts set down on Mount Yujun and then brought me inside. Most of the heavenly officials began brooding over his words, muttering to themselves or staying silent. Only after a while did a heavenly official ask, Everyone, what do you think? Just listening to their voices, Shi Lian could already imagine the appearances of all the heavenly officials as they repeatedly shook their heads with their hands out. No opinion! I don't have an opinion. I don't know what he wants to do, but it's rather horrifying. As always, nobody can make sense of what Hua Cheng wants to do. Although Shi Lian had just been given a rundown of Hua Cheng's reputation as the devil incarnate, towards this person, Shi Lian didn't really think he was scary. If he had really had to say something, he thought this time it could be considered Hua Cheng helped him out. In short, the first prayer for blessings he received after ascending and returning to the heavens ought to finally be considered finished in this manner. It was already long agreed that all the merits from Mount Yujun case would be considered Shi Lian's, despite how some time had passed before the official remembered to redeem his vow because of his daughter's death. He still fulfilled the promise with a broken heart, although inevitably he ended up paying less. However, after gathering from here and there and letting them off a bit, the 8,880,000 merits were more or less considered paid off. So that's because when Shi Lian first arrived in heaven, he accidentally caused some damage, he owed some money basically. Since he's finished this case, he is debt-free. Without debt, Shi Lian's body felt light and free, his heart practically a clear and boundless sky. In high spirits, he was entirely free from worry and very happy. Shi Lian decided to properly be a god, and it would be even better if he could become at least half a friend with the other heavenly officials. Although it was usually peaceful within the heaven's spiritual communication array, when it got busy, the shouts inside could go on for days on end. In addition, when the heavenly officials' moods were good, and perhaps when they saw something interesting, they could talk about it within the array. When that moment came, they would chuckle lowly for a while. Although Shi Lian couldn't tell who, he was still silently listening to everyone speak. However, he couldn't go on staying silent forever. Thus, after he listened for a while, he'd sometimes appear to say something warmly like, "That's quite interesting. I read a very beautiful poem, let me share it with everyone. There's this little secret know-how that's very effective for dealing with waist and leg pain. Let me share it with everyone." However, regrettably, every time he sent out these carefully selected things that were quite beneficial to the body and mind, the array would fall silent. After a while, Ling Wen really couldn't stand it anymore and privately told him, "Your Highness, the things you send in the spirit array are all very good. However, I'm afraid that even a heavenly official a few hundred years older than you wouldn't send them." Shi Lian began to feel a bit depressed. In reality, he clearly wasn't the oldest. However, when he was with the other heavenly officials, why was he practically like an elderly person who couldn't keep up with the topics of the youngsters? In other words, he's been away from heaven for so long, he's behind the times. Oh, poor Grandpa. He probably stayed away from the heavens for too long. In addition, he was always ignorant and ill-informed and never much cared about things from the outside world. Since he couldn't fix this, it was better to forget about it. Shi Lian gave up on the issue and as a result stopped being gloomy as well. However, he still had a problem left. Until now, there had been no one in the mortal realm who'd built a new temple for him. Perhaps there were, but in any case, the heavens didn't find any when they searched, and thus there wasn't any record of it. It must be borne in mind... Oh, stop moving, stupid mouse. It must be borne in mind that even a local earth god has some kind of shrine. But even until today, Shi Lian, someone who very solemnly ascended to become a heavenly official and even did it 3 times, didn't have a single temple or single believer who would consecrate incense to him. What do you do, fellow mortals? Yeah, that sounds like him. Oh, this was extremely awkward. Although only other heavenly officials were feeling awkward for him, Shi Lian himself still thought things were alright. In addition, one day, he suddenly got carried away by a whim and was inspired. If no one wants to provide me with offerings, it should be fine if I provide offerings to myself, right? The heavenly officials didn't know how to respond to that. Who the hell had heard of a heavenly official providing offerings to themselves? Being miserable to this degree as a god, what kind of feeling would be left? As for Shi Lian, he was long accustomed to awkward silence whenever he spoke. He thought amusing himself and making himself laugh could be considered something interesting. Thus, after making his decision, he once again jumped down to the mortal realm. This time, when he reached the ground, his location was that of a small mountain village called Pukui Village. Although one said it was a mountain village, in reality it was just a small dirt slope. Shi Lian saw the place had elegant scenery with green hills, clear waters, and paddy fields reaching out into the horizon. In his heart, he thought, "This time I truly landed somewhere nice." Shi Lian looked around again and noticed a crooked, broken hut sitting on top of the small dirt slope. When he asked people about it, all the villagers said the broken hut has been abandoned and has no owner. Occasionally there are wanderers who go in there to sleep for a night. Live there if you wish. Wasn't this exactly what Shi Lian had been desiring? He immediately walked towards it. Only after walking nearer did he realize that though the little hut looked quite dilapidated from afar, it actually looked even more dilapidated up close. 2 of the 4 pillars at the corners of the hut were already rotten and decaying away. As soon as the wind blew, the entire hut would begin emitting creaking sounds, making one doubt whether or not it would fall at times. Of course you would turn it into innuendo, Phil. We can always rely on you for innuendo. However, this degree of beaten up was still within a range Shi Lian could accept. After entering the hut and looking around, he began cleaning things up. When the villagers saw this, they were all very surprised. Someone was actually going to live there. They all gathered to enjoy watching him bustle around. Contrary to what one would expect, the villagers were all enthusiastic. Not only did they gift him with a broom after seeing his filthy appearance after his cleaning, they gifted him some newly picked water chestnuts. The skin on the water chestnuts were already peeled off, and they were white and tender, sweet and juicy. Shi Lian squatted in front of his broken hut and finished eating the water chestnuts. Happily pressing his hands together, he decided right then in his heart to call this place the Pukui Monastery. There originally had been a small table within the Pukui Monastery. After rubbing it twice, it could be used as an offering table. As Shi Lian continued to busy around, the villagers that surrounded him in order to watch realized this youngster actually wanted to make some room to create a little Taoist monastery. They all found this even more uncommon and strange, and thus came to ask one after another, "This temple, who are you offering it to?" Shi Lian lightly coughed once before saying, "This monastery is for the Jianli Crown Prince." Everyone was miffed. Who is that?" Shi Lian said, I also don't know. I think he's a crown prince. Oh, what does he do? He is probably someone who ensures peace. And then the next one is a thought, he doesn't say this part out loud. And he collects rubbish on the side. Everyone began fervently asking, then this Highness the Crown Prince, does he deal with ushering in wealth and prosperity? Shi Lian thought in his heart not owing money was already pretty good. Then he said in a warm voice, it's regrettable, but it seems like that's not possible. One after another, people started giving him suggestions. Or you could offer it up to the Water Master instead. That will invite wealth. Incense burning here would definitely be prosperous. Or maybe you can offer it to Lingwen Zhenjun. Who knows? Maybe someone from our village will become I can't say that word, Zhuangyan? Oh, someone that passes, a scholar, a high level scholar. A woman shyly and timidly said, that, have you considered, Shi Lian maintained his smile and said, who? General Zhu Yang? The tremendously masculine god. If he really opened a Zhu Yang monastery, he was afraid Feng Jin would immediately shoot an arrow from the heavens to smite him. After roughly cleaning up the monastery, it was still missing some incense burners. Quantong. It's something you can find in a temple. Pictures here. It is a... Okay, so it, holds incense. Okay. It's like a jar for holding incense. And various things. However, Shi Lian had completely forgotten about the most important thing. The godly statue. He carried his bamboo hat and strode out the door. Oh, right. There was no door either. After thinking for a bit, Shi Lian decided this hut definitely needed to be rebuilt. Thus, he wrote a sign and placed it at the doorfront. It said, this monastery is dilapidated, sincerely seeking benevolent people to donate in order to renovate it, accumulate merits and virtue. After leaving the hut and walking for 7 or 8 li, which is like half a kilometer, he arrived in a town. For what reason would he go to town? Well, it was naturally in order to muddle about, find some food to eat. Thus, he once again took up his old profession. In legends and folklore, it was said immortals no longer needed to eat. In reality, this was hard to say. Although those with almighty power could absorb the spiritual energy from sunshine and rain and dew, the problem was, although they could do that, if they didn't need to, who would like to? Why would they want to do something like that? But some of the heavenly officials required the 5 viscera to be clean and pure because they practiced the Buddhism path. Indeed, those people could not stand the mortal's greasy meat and fish. If they were dirtied by those things, it would be the same as if a mortal ate raw, uncooked, poisonous bugs or mud, for they would begin vomiting and having diarrhea. That's unfortunate. You're a god and you can still have diarrhea. You'd think that would be out the window. That being the case, it wasn't that they didn't eat food. They just ate things that were born in a clean and pure place, stuff that promised longevity. These were immortal fruits and spiritual animals that would increase the efficiency of spiritual energy. Yeah, the more powerful gods could photosynthesize, basically. However, this kind of problem didn't exist for Shi Lian. With the curse upon him, he was no different compared to mortals and could eat anything. And because he was a seasoned veteran of 100 battles, no matter what he ate, he wouldn't die. Whether it was a steamed bun that had been lying around for a month or pastries that had already spouted some green mold, he'd be fine after eating those. Since he had a constitution like this that defied the heavens, he actually got by all right during the periods he collected scraps. In contrast, opening a monastery meant losing money. Collecting rubbish meant making money. So collecting rubbish was truly better than ascending. This poor boy has had to eat trash to survive. And he's okay with it. Because it meant he got to survive. My poor boy. He looked as elegant as Chinese jade, with the air of an immortal, so he had an advantage when collecting scraps. It didn't take long before Shi Lian collected a big bag's worth. On his way back, he saw an old ox pulling a handcart with rice straws on it, piled sky high. Oh my god, Phil, you just hit me with the fact that this would be the perfect setup for, an AU where he's just a poor college kid living off of ramen noodles. Oh man, it'd be perfect. Somebody probably wrote it already. On his way back, he saw an old ox pulling a handcart with rice straws on it, piled sky high. Shi Lian remembered he seemed to have seen this handcart in Pukui village before, so they must be going the same way. He asked whether or not he could hitch a ride back, and the handcart owner lifted his chin, indicating he could climb up. Thus, Shilian sat onto the cart with his big bag of scraps. Only after he climbed on did he realize that behind the pile of straw, there was someone lying there. The upper part of the person's body was hidden by the pile of straw. His left leg was bent at the knee and supporting his right leg, and it seemed he was using his arms as a pillow to take a rest. He appeared extremely leisurely and contented. The person's satisfied attitude was one Shilian rather envied. The pair of black boots were tight, fitting snugly on his slender, straight, low legs that looked rather easy on the eyes. Shilian recalled what he'd seen under his veil on that night on the mountain and couldn't help but take a few more glances at those boots. After he confirmed there weren't any silver chains hanging on the boots that were made from who knows what kind of animal fur, he thought to himself, this has to be some family's young master who ran out to play, right? Shilian recalled what he'd... Oh, no. For some reason, whenever I scroll down, sometimes my mouse jumps back up to the previous paragraph. Like, why would you do this to me, mouse? The handcart sluggishly swayed about on the road. Still carrying his bamboo hat on his back, Shilian took out a scroll and prepared to read. In the past, he'd never been that mindful of all the news that circulated in the outside world. However, because of the many awkward silences he'd caused, he decided it was probably best if he did some cramming. After the ox cart swayed for who knows how long, it passed through a forest. Shilian raised his head to look around in all four directions, only to see rolling green fields and splendid maples resembling fire, bringing about an eye-catching sight between the gaps of the mountains and the wilderness. Such a scene was extremely intoxicating, penetrating one's heart with its crisp and fresh atmosphere. Shilian couldn't help but stare blankly a bit. When he was young and still cultivating within the Huangji Temple was built on a mountain. Covering the mountains and the plains were maple forests, looking as brilliant as gold and as intense as fire. This situation and scenery made it difficult for Shilian not to recollect the past. He gazed into the distance for a while before he lowered his head to continue looking at the scroll. After he opened the scroll, he saw a row of words at his first glance that said, "The Crown Prince of Jianli who ascended 3 times, a martial god, a demon personifying pestilence, a scrap god." ... Shilian said, "Alright, if you carefully think about it in regards to a martial god and a scrap god, there's not that much of a difference between them. All gods are equal, all living things are equal." At this moment, a light chuckle sounded from behind him and a voice said, "Is that right?" The teenager spoke up in a lazy tone. "People always like saying that gods are equal, all living things are equal. But if that was truly the case, all those various immortals and gods would simply not exist." The voice came from behind the straw pile on the cart. Shilian turned around to take a look and saw the teenager was still lying there in a languid manner. He didn't look like he much wanted to get up, so he probably had just spoken without thinking too much on it. Thus, Shilian replied with a smile, "What you said also makes sense." He turned around and continued looking at a scroll which said, "Many people believe that as a demon representing pestilence, anything with Jianli's Crown Prince personal handwriting and portraits has the ability to curse people. If you pasted them onto someone's back, or perhaps someone's family's main entrance, it will cause misfortune upon the family or person in question." In other words, this poor boy's bad reputation has led to people using his actual face as a bad luck charm. This kind of commentary made it hard for someone to tell if they were talking about a god or a ghost. Shilian shook his head and didn't have the heart to continue looking at the comments related to himself. He decided it would be better if he first found out about all the heavenly officials currently present in heaven. This way, he could avoid always being unclear who was who, which was rather lacking in manners. He recalled how the village had mentioned the Watermaster, and began rummaging through the scroll for comments on the Watermaster. He flipped to a sentence that said, "Watermaster Wudu wields water as well as wealth. Hence, within the stores and houses of many merchants, they would all have a statue of the Watermaster to ensure their wealths and fortunes." Shilian was a bit baffled. Since he's a water god, why would he also wield power over wealth and fortunes? At this moment, the teenager lying behind the pile of straw spoke up again. "When the caravan peddler transports goods, they must first ship it using the waterway. Thus every time before they set off on their journey, they would go to Watermaster's temple and burn a tall incense candle. They would pray to have a good journey, and promise to do this and that once they return. Because it has been long this way, the Watermaster began to gradually wield power over both wealth and fortune. He was actually specifically clearing his confusion. Shilian turned around and said, "Is that the case? Interesting. Presumably this Watermaster is an awfully powerful big heavenly official." The teenager sneered and said, "Yeah, water tyrannizing the skies." This tone of his made it seem like he didn't particularly care much for this heavenly official. It also didn't look like he was saying anything nice. Shilian asked, "What is water tyrannizing the skies?" The teenager... Stop scrolling up, stupid mouse. The teenager leisurely said, "When a boat passes through a big river, whether it moves or stays all depends on his word. If one doesn't make offerings to him, their boat would flip. Pretty tyrannical. That's why he got gifted with the nickname, which is water tyrannizing the skies. It is more or less the same as Zhu Yang, tremendously masculine general, and floor-sweeping general." For the famous heavenly officials with resounding titles, they all had some nicknames in the mortal realm and heaven. Things similar to Shilian's laughingstock of the three realms, famous weirdo, bearer of ill luck, stray dog, cough, and so on. Usually using a nickname to address a heavenly official was something extremely lacking in manners. For example, if someone dared to call Mu Qing floor-sweeping general in front of his face, he would certainly become extremely angry. Shilian noted down that he couldn't use that nickname before saying, "You were very young, but it turns out there's quite a lot of things you know." The teenager said, "I don't know much, just idle. When I have a free time, I would take a look, that's all." In the mortal realm, one could find a great deal of pamphlets about mythology wherever you looked, all talking about the stories of gods and ghosts. Those stories ranged from major ones about kindness and enmity to small trifling matters. Some were fake and some were true. Thus, this teenager knew quite a lot, but it couldn't be considered too strange. Shilian set down his scroll and said, "Then you know a lot about gods. However, do you know a lot about ghosts?" The teenager said, "Which ghost?" Shilian said, "Blood rain reaching toward a flower. Hua Chang." When he heard that, the teenager lowly chuckled before he finally sat up. When he turned around, Shilian's gaze suddenly alighted. He saw the teenager was around 16 or 17 years old. The red of his clothes surpassed the maples, and his skin was white like snow. Those pairs of eyes were shining like stars, containing a smile as he glanced askance at him. The teenager was exceptionally handsome. However, his expression inevitably contained a hint of wildness. His black hair was loosely tied up and was tied slightly askew. It looked exceedingly casual, like he did whatever he wished. The two of them were currently passing through the fiery and splendidly colored maple forest. The maple leaves danced as they fell one by one, and there was even a leaf that fell on the teenager's shoulders. The teenager lightly blew at it, making the leaf fall, and only then did he raise his head to look at him. With a smile that didn't quite look like a smile, he said, "What do you wish to know? Don't hesitate to ask." So it's kind of obvious who this guy is. They even mentioned in the previous chapter that he is a shapeshifter who often takes the form of a teenager. Also, he takes the form of a woman sometimes, they mentioned, but I don't think that actually happens in the story. But clearly, we have stumbled upon a future husband! A wild future husband has appeared. And that was chapter 13. We will continue for a bit, because we just got to the boy! We can't quit now! I really relate to Hua Cheng in this book, but I also wanted to hit him on so many occasions. I think he's... I don't know, I feel like I totally agree with you, but I also think he's if you've read her other books, of the love interests, he's the one that has his shit together the most. He's the most well-adjusted, which he has had 800 years to be alive. The others, the other main characters in these stories by this author tend to be a lot more unbalanced. I would say both of them are the best adjusted, honestly. Shilian and Hua Cheng, both, despite their trauma, tend to be pretty well adjusted. They actually communicate to a certain extent. They work together. Yeah, like... The other romances, they have a little more trouble, but hey, they're mortals. What can you say? They're just mortals trying to figure things out. Well, I ship it. Yeah, don't we all? His face had an expression of ridicule, yet he held an inexplicable, omniscient composure. Although he had the voice of a teenager, it was slightly deeper compared to boys his age, and was extremely pleasant to hear. Shilian sat upright on the ox cart still with serious concentration. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Blood rain reaching towards a flower. This scene sounds rather impressive. Friend, would you tell me how the name came to be?" As a show of respect, Shilian decided not to add the young word in front of friend. The teen sat casually with his arm propped on a raised knee. He tidied the cuffs on his sleeves before nonchalantly saying, the backstory isn't that impressive. It's only because Hua Chang had once eradicated another ghost's nest, and just as he was done, it started raining blood all over the mountain. When he left, he saw a flower on the side of the road, beaten rather pitifully by the blood rain, so he tipped his umbrella and provided it with cover for a bit. Shilian imagined the scene and felt that amidst the blood, rain, and wind, there was some elegance and sentiment deeply entwined. He recalled again the legend of how the ghost, clad in red, had set fire to 33 temples, before he said with a laugh, "Does Hua Chang frequently pick fights wherever he goes?" The teen replied, "I wouldn't say frequently. I guess it depends on his mood." Shilian asked, "What kind of person was he like before he died?" The young man replied, "He definitely couldn't have been a good person." Shilian asked, "What does he look like?" The moment this question was asked, the teen lifted his eyes to peer at him. He cocked his head from side to side before he stood up to walk over to Shilian, then sat down beside him. The teen replied with a question himself. "What do you think? What should he look like?" Upon looking at him more closely, Shilian felt the teen was even more striking up close. It was the kind of handsome that brought about a faint sense of being attacked, like an unsheathed sharp sword. It was an image so dazzling one couldn't look at it directly, causing people not to dare look him straight in the eye. Their gaze only met briefly, and already Shilian couldn't take it anymore. After slightly inclining his head to the side, he said, "Being such a renowned demon lord, it can be assumed he shapeshifts a lot, so he must have many appearances." When he saw how he turned his head, the teen raised an eyebrow and said, "That's right, but sometimes he still uses his real appearance. The appearance we're talking about is naturally his original self." Shilian was unsure if he was sensing wrong, but he felt as if the distance between the two of them had grown further apart. Thus, he once again turned his head back before saying, "Then I feel like his original self could definitely be a teenager like you." Hearing this, the teenager's mouth curved upwards before he said, "Why?" Shilian said, "Not why, since you can say whatever. Then I can think whatever. Everything can be whatever we please." The teen chuckled twice before saying, "Perhaps, but he's blind in one eye." He tapped the spot under his right eye and said, "This one." The statement wasn't unheard of. Previously, Shilian had also somewhat heard about this. Within certain versions of the legends, Hua Chang wore a black eye patch over his right eye, covering the eye he'd lost. Shilian said, "Do you know what the matter is with that eye of his?" The teen replied, This question, a lot of people want to figure it out too." When the other people wanted to know what made Hua Chang lose his right eye, they were in fact wanting to know what his weakness was. But with Shilian asking, he purely wanted to know. Shilian hadn't spoken his next words before the teenager said, "He dug it out himself." Startled, Shilian asked, "Why?" The teen replied, "He went mad." After going insane, he would even dig out his own eye. Shilian's curiosity toward this blood rain reaching towards a flower, the ghost king clad in red, continued to increase. Curiosity. Horniness. He reckoned it couldn't be simple as having gone crazy, but since the teenager already said it like this, presumably there wouldn't be a more detailed explanation. Shilian continued to ask, "Does Hua Chang have a weakness?" Shilian wasn't expecting an answer from the boy for this question, but he thought he'd ask it anyway for what it was worth. If Hua Chang's weakness could be so easily discovered by another, then the subject in question couldn't be Hua Chang. However, who knew? The teenager replied without hesitation. His ashes. If one could obtain the ashes of a ghost, they would have the power to command the ghost. If the ghost did not comply, one could destroy their ashes, which would extinguish their form and have their soul shattered and scattered. This was common knowledge. However, when it came to Hua Cheng, even this common knowledge wouldn't pose much significance. Shi Lian laughed and said, "I'm afraid no one would be able to obtain his ashes. Thus, this weakness is equivalent to not having one." And yet the teen responded, "Not necessarily. There's one kind of situation where a ghost would take the initiative to give away his ashes." Shi Lian said, like how he challenged those 33 heavenly officials to a match, betting his own ashes? Scoffing, the teen said, "No, not possible." Although he didn't say it fully, Shi Lian was still able to hear the meaning behind his words. He'd probably meant, how could Hua Cheng lose? The teenager continued, "There's a tradition in the ghost realm. In the case where a ghost has chosen their person, they would entrust the ashes into that person's hands. In reality, that would be the same thing as handing over one's own life to another person. For such dedication, what sort of touching story that captured one's imagination would this be?" Engrossed on the subject, Shi Lian said, "So it turns out the ghost realm would have such a sentimental custom." The teenager said they do, but not many ghosts would dare do it. Shi Lian thought that was the case. If there were demons in this world who would scam or entice the hearts of people, there would also be humans who would fool demons. There would exist much ongoing exploitation and betrayal. He said, if it was handed over an infatuation, yet only resulted in broken bones and scattered ashes, it would indeed render one's heart to feel aggrieved. However, the teenager laughed before saying, "What's there to be afraid of? If it were me, after giving away my ashes, I wouldn't care if that person wished to break bones, scatter ashes, or toss it for fun." Shi Lian smiled before he suddenly remembered, despite how the two of them had chatted for so long, he still hadn't learned the other boy's name. Hello, Jeff. Welcome back. You've walked in right into future husband meeting, where Shi Lian is pretending he doesn't know who this teenager really is, and the teenager is secretly the love interest in a disguise. Yeah, this is a very lovely story. I love this writing. It's just so sweet and sentimental. "My friend, how should I address you?" The teen raised a hand to place it over his eyebrow, covering his eyes from the afterglow of the red wine-colored setting sun. He squinted his eyes, making it seem as if he wasn't too fond of the sunlight. He said, "Me? In my family, I'm ranked third. Everyone calls me San Lang. San Lang. San meaning 3, I believe." He didn't take the initiative to tell him his actual name, so Shi Lian didn't continue to ask. He responded, "My family name is Shi, and my given name is the single character Lian. Since you're heading in this direction, are you also going to Pukui Village?" Shi Lian is horny on me. Yeah, he is. Which is funny, because as we'll learn later, well, this really isn't a major spoiler, it's just funny. His method of cultivating magic power has to do with being a virgin. He can't have sex or he loses his power. It's not dealt with much in the story, but it's a funny detail. San Lang leaned back against the pile of hay. He tucked both his hands under his head as a pillow and crossed his legs before saying, "I don't know. I randomly chose this way." There seemed to be an inside story to what he'd said. Shi Lian said, "What's the matter?" San Lang heaved a sigh before casually saying, "There was quarreling at home and I got driven out. I've walked for some time, but there's nowhere to go. Today I got so hungry I nearly fainted at the end of Main Street, and then I randomly found a place to sit down. Might be wrong, but think it's pronounced long, so San Long. I wonder if it'll come up with this one, since this is a pretty common, I think, Chinese last name. Of course, the first thing that comes up is this book." I think San is San. No, I don't want name in Chinese, damn it. Don't translate name in Chinese. Okay, here we go. Oh, there's a Chinese pronunciation wiki. Great! So how do you say it? I don't want to listen to the...
Long, long, long.
Long. Okay, so it is long, but kind of less like lang and more long. So yeah, it's kind of like long, but a little, I guess a little softer. Let's see if they do San. I'm gonna have to keep this page up. Alright, So Sanlang. We'll get there. While the boy's clothes appeared to be quite casual, the quality was of excellent material. In addition, his refined way of speech and how he seemed to be very idle, having the time to read this and that, ever the all-knowing. Shilian had long suspected he was some rich family's young master who'd come out to play. A pampered young boy who'd wandered outside alone for so long, he must have inevitably come across many hardships on the road. This was something Shilian could deeply relate to. Hearing he was hungry, Shilian began rummaging through his satchel, but could only produce a single steamed bun. When he realized this bun had not yet stiffened, he internally rejoiced before he said to the teen, "Do you want to eat it?" The teenager nodded, so Shilian gave him the steamed bun. Sanlang looked at him and said, "You don't have any more." Shilian said, "I'm okay, I'm not that hungry." Sanlang pushed the steamed bun back to him and said, "I'm also okay, too." Upon seeing this, Shilian took back the steamed bun and broke it, dividing it into 2 halves. Then he once again gave the teenager half and said, "Then you take half, and I'll take half." Only then did the boy take the steamed bun, nibbling on it with him as they sat side by side. Seeing how he sat by his side and took a bite of the bun while looking ineffably a bit well-behaved, Shilian couldn't help but feel as though he had wronged him somewhere. The ox cart moved up and down along the bumpy mountain road, being slowly pulled along as the sun began gradually setting in the west. The 2 of them sat on the cart and continuously chatted. The more they talked, the more Shilian felt how peculiar this boy was. Despite his young age, his every word and action had an air about him. He was always undisturbed, as though between the vast expanse of heaven and earth, there was nothing in this world he wouldn't know or would ever confound him. It made Shilian believe he understood a lot and was quite mature despite being so young, and yet sometimes he would also reveal the enthusiasm belonging to a youth. When Shilian said he was the master of Pukui Monastery, the teenager said, "Pukui Monastery? Sounds like there'd be a lot of water chestnuts to eat. I like it. For whom is the monastery devoted to?" After once again being asked this headache-inducing question, Shilian lightly coughed and said, "Xian Li's crown prince. You probably don't know about him." A lazy smile appeared on the teenager's face, but before he could respond, the ox cart suddenly jolted in a sudden quake. The 2 of them swayed to and fro. Shilian was worried the boy might fall off and reached out to grab a hold of him. But who knew the moment he touched Sanlang, the teenager acted as if he was scorched by something hot and forcefully shook off his hand. This part hurts me, especially if you've read the book and you know why he does that. It's briefly mentioned why, way late in the book, that he, without spoilers, he felt like he wasn't worth being touched. There was a gay romance in Chinese mythology where a couple shared a peach, and that might be a nod to it. Maybe! Though the peach couple ends really badly because the one guy betrays him, and anyway, but that might be something there. Ugh, that's so sad. Even though his expression shifted only slightly, Shilian still perceived it. He thought to himself, perhaps this boy actually hated him. But during the ride, it was clear they had fun conversing. However, right now, there wasn't time to think further on the topic. "Bye, Phil. Thanks for joining us." Standing up, he asked, "What's happening?" The old man driving the ox cart said, "I don't know what's going on either. Old Huang, why have you stopped moving? Come on, move!" At this time, the sun had already set with twilight approaching. Yet the ox cart was still within the mountain's forest, where it looked gloomy and dark all around. The old ox stubbornly stood in its spot, refusing to move and being temperamental. All the urging the old man did was rendered useless with the ox, for it acted as if it wanted to bury its own head into the ground. Its tail vigorously swished around like a whip as it continued to persistently moo. Shilian perceived something was off and was about to leap off the cart when suddenly the old man pointed at something up ahead and started yelling. Shilian turned, only to see at the front of the mountain road many clusters of green flames in the east and the west that were burning faintly. A group of people clothed in white were holding their heads as they slowly walked toward them. Seeing this, Shilian immediately uttered, "Protect!" Ruoi broke away from his wrist before circling the ox cart once, creating a ring floating in midair that protected the 3 of them and the animal. Shilian turned his head and said, "What day is today?" The old man had yet to reply when the teenager behind him said, "The Ghost Festival." Halfway through the 7th month, the ghost door opens. He hadn't looked at the date when he left, but today just happened to be the Ghost Festival. Shilian lowered his voice and said, "Don't randomly walk about. We've bumped into evil today. If we walk down the wrong path, we won't be able to return." So I think this is true in Japan as well as China. The 7th month, which is August, yes, is the month of, like, ghosts. It's the time of year that the door between the two worlds opens up further. It's the Obon festival, I think, in Japan. And ghosts get to, like, come freely and chill out in the human world before they have to go back. So that's what's, it's the 1st of August, I guess, which actually, isn't that, we're about to be, or no, July, not August, jeez. I think it's by the lunar calendar, so it may be July or August, I don't know. But we're getting there. Summer is the time of ghosts in Japan, and I think China as well. They share a lot of stuff, because all their cultures kind of have some historical points where they all go back to the same place, and then they divide. So now we're on chapter 15. We'll keep reading, because like I said, I'm not going to be able to stream Fatal Frame tonight because of having to go run errands, but we'll keep going for now. LOL, he's sitting next to evil. Well, depends on how you define evil. But you're not wrong. He is sitting next to a ghost. Chapter 15. Clothes redder than maple, skin as white as snow. The crowd of white-clothed people had no heads atop their necks, wearing only prison garments as each one of them carried a single skull. They seemed to be a group of beheaded convicts, slowly making their way towards the ox cart while the heads within the crooks of their arms chattered ceaselessly. Shilian lowered his voice and said to the other two, "In a moment when they come close, do not make any noise." Sanlong tilted his head to the side and asked, "It would seem that Gege, you are a person of extraordinary talent and a master of strange things." Alright, I'm going to Google if I'm saying this right. This is a word that's going to come up a lot now. So, China has a lot of terms like, you know how Japan has, like, you put a word after the end of a person's name to indicate who they are, like, sensei, san, kun, like, friendship name, that kind of thing. Gege is kind of like that, but it's more like, typically it's for a big brother, but you don't have to use it for family members. It can also be someone that you're not actually related to, but is like an endearment for someone older than you, or higher up on the, you know, power structure than you. By calling him Gege, he's kind of being respectful and endearing as well. It's kind of like admitting, you know, saying that you're my, you know, you're higher up than me, you're my older brother, but, you know, you're my bro. It's a little confusing, but he's gonna call him Gege for the rest of the book, basically. With him sounding so intrigued, Shilian replied, "I wouldn't say a person of extraordinary talent and master of strange things. I only know a bit. They can't see us right now, but in a moment, when they get closer, it'll be harder to say." Upon seeing the white silk shoot through the air on its own, the old cart driver was dumbstruck. In addition, with how he was seeing headless people on top of that, he was about to kneel over with fright. He shook his head with great alarm. No, I can't! I won't be able to keep silent! Dao Zhang, what do I do?" This is another term. Basically, Dao Zhang is a priest, a Taoist priest. So it's a respectful term to reply to Shilian because he's technically a priest of his own temple now. Shilian replied, "Well, there is another way. Forgive me." Having said that, he swiftly tapped the man on the back, and he immediately collapsed on the cart, knocked out. Shilian gently caught and arranged him into a sleeping position, then sat down on the driver's seat himself. Suddenly, he felt movement behind him. Turning his head to look, Shilian saw the young man had followed suit and sat down behind him as well, so he asked, "Are you all right?" Sunlong propped up his chin with a hand. "Of course not. I'm scared." Even though there wasn't even half an ounce of fear in his voice, Shilian still comforted him. "There's no need to be scared. If you stay behind me, there will be nothing that can hurt you." I've heard it's pronounced Guga. I think you're right now that I think about it, because I read it and just read it the way it looks in English, but I think that's how they say it in the Untamed show, which also uses it to refer to Lanzhan sometimes. This author has a kink for Guga, I think. Because, like, that's two of her main characters that refer to their husbands as Guga. I wonder if that's common among those kind of couples, or if that's just something that she does. Yeah, these two are precious. I love that he's just like, I'm scared, comfort me. And he's not at all. He's the Ghost King! That's like a lion looking at a kitten and saying, I'm scared. The teen smiled and kept silent. Shileon suddenly noticed that he was staring at him. More specifically, he was staring at the cursed collar on his neck. The cursed collar appeared as a black necklace around his neck. It was almost impossible to hide and would easily induce others into making bad assumptions regarding it. Shileon gently tugged his collar even though it wouldn't hide anything. With the darkening sky, he couldn't quite see the young man's expression anymore. Shileon took up the reins and tried to quietly urge the ox forward. The crowd of ghosts dressed in prisoners' clothes approached, wanting to pass, before they realized there was something in the middle of the road blocking their way. That's strange. Why can't we pass? For real? It's blocked? What the hell? Is this the work of some ghost? Fuck, aren't we ghosts ourselves? How does that work? Shileon finally got the ox to move, and had just pushed past the bodies of the headless ghost convicts. He found it all rather funny as he listened to them bickering while holding their heads. The crowd of ghosts still had much to complain about. Aren't you mistaken? Why does it feel like the one holding your head is my body? Must be your body that grabbed the wrong head. Guys, hurry and switch back. Why is the cut wound from your head so ragged? Sighing, the ghost said, My executioner was a newbie. It took him 5 or 6 attempts to chop off my head. I was even starting to expect they were doing it on purpose. Your family didn't offer them money, huh? Next time, remember to bribe them beforehand for a quick and clean chop. Next time, my ass... On the 15th day of the 7th month, the Ghost Festival was the Ghost Realm's largest, most celebrated holiday. On this day, the gates of the Ghost Realm would open, allowing the ghosts who usually lurked in the shadows to freely surge forth and celebrate unrestrained. The living should retreat, especially on this night, and the best course of action would be to firmly shut one's door and stay put at home. If one did come out, the chances of encountering something unpleasant would be much higher than usual. Shileon, a person dogged by misfortune, was someone who would even run head-on into ghosts while wearing his Taoist robes. In fact, this had just happened. Their surroundings were full of floating green ghost fire, along with a host of deceased spirits chasing after the wavering flames. Some, dressed in their burial clothes, were expressionlessly murmuring to themselves, all kneeling in front of a circle as they reached out to receive the paper money, silver and gold ingots their descendants had burned for them. Shileon, a person... Oh my god, why does this thing keep scrolling up? I might need a new freaking mouse. Where'd it go? Here we are. This scene could be described as riotous revelry of the dead. Shileon weaved through the middle, thinking that from this day onwards he must remember to check the calendar before traveling, when a shrill sound similar to that of a dying chicken cried out. This is bad! This is bad! Ghosts are getting murdered! The warning sent the crowd of ghosts into a frenzy. Where? Where's the murder? The ghost who had cried first said, It scared me to death! I was over there when I discovered many scattered ghost fires. They were all brutally shredded. It's so cruel. All shredded? This is dismemberment! Absolutely atrocious. Who did it? It can't be that there are enchantment masters or monks hidden among us. The headless convict from before also shouted, Now that you mention it, earlier on the road, there was something blocking us so we couldn't pass. It couldn't have been. Where? Right over there. Shileon internally yelled, This isn't good. In a flash, a swarm of ghosts and ghouls encircled the ox cart, each one revealing fierce faces full of malicious intents. I smell the heated sense of yang energy. Okay, so, yin and yang, Confucius, the yin-yang symbol. Yang energy is male energy, it's positive, it's powerful, it's like sunlight energy. Yin is female, it's darkness, it's the moon. So they're sensing yang energy, which I think tends to be more associated with the living. I think yin is more darkness, resentful energy, the dead. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's... So they're basically, I think they say they're sensing people, living people. They couldn't hide anymore. During the Ghost Festival, it would be considered unreasonable on the mortals front for a living mortal to bump into the dead. Shileon had no intention of starting a fight with all these ghosts, so he could only hurry the cart along. Go! The ox was already incredibly spooked. It shifted uneasily in its place while pawing at the ground with its hoof, so upon hearing his command, it impatiently bolted off. Shilian didn't forget to grab hold of the teen behind him. Hold on! Recovering Roy while conveniently beating open an escape path, they charged out of the encirclement, illuminated by the ring of ghost fire. The ghost, missing an arm and a leg, was enraged and shrieked. That really was a Daoshi! Which is an informal way, it says, of saying Daozang. So, an informal way of saying a priest. That damn Daoshi must be too impatient to die. Since the living dare disturb our ghost festival, they can't blame us if anything happens. After them! Shilian grabbed the reins with one hand and used the other to pull out a handful of talismans. Throwing them toward the ground, he shouted, "Hinder!" What aided their escape was the Hinder talisman. A series of consecutive booming noises sounded, where each one would send an obstacle towards the ghosts, hindering their movements, but only for a short while. However, although it was only a short period of time, with the use of this many talismans, it would take half an incense stick's worth of time before the ghost could catch up. Like he had fire burning up his ass. That's a great line. Like he had fire burning up his ass. Shilian drove the cart and escaped for a stretch of the mountain road before suddenly saying, "Stop!" As it turns out, the old ox had pulled the cart to a fork in the road, and upon seeing that there were 2 dark mountain roads ahead, Shilian immediately pulled on the reins. This was where they needed to be exceedingly cautious. On the day of the Ghost Festival, mortals would find themselves walking along a road only to suddenly encounter another path that hadn't existed before. This kind of path was not meant to be walked by mortals. Once one took the wrong path and entered the ghost's realm, it would prove to be difficult and unlikely should they wish to return. Shilian was a newcomer and unsure of which mountain path to take. He then remembered what he bought in town. Besides the large bag of collected scraps amongst the miscellaneous items he'd bought, there was a cylinder container of fortune-telling sticks. He decided to draw sticks to pick a path, so he dug out the container, held it in his hands, and shook it while praying, "Heavenly officials, bestow your blessings onto me. Lead me onto the right path. The first stick for left, the second for right. Whichever path has a better fortune is the one I'll take." After saying this, 2 sticks clattered into his hands, but looking at the results, Shilian had no words. Ill-fated tokens. Great misfortune. So in other words, both fortunes were horrible. Both sticks were ill-fated. Both roads were unlucky. Didn't that mean that whichever road they took would lead to death? Feeling helpless, Shilian gripped the container with 2 hands and shook it vigorously. "Container, oh container, we've only just met today, so don't be so heartless. I'm going to try again, so won't you save me some face?" As he finished saying this, the clacking sounds of 2 more sticks fell out. Again, they were both bad luck. At this time, the Sanlong, who was next to him, suddenly said, "Let me give it a try." It wasn't like he could get anything worse, so Shilian passed it over. Sanlong took it with one hand and casually shook it. Out dropped 2 sticks. He picked them up and handed them over without even glancing at the results. Shilian took them and saw they were both good fortune sticks. He couldn't help but be amazed. Due to his immense bad luck, it tended to also negatively affect the luck of people around him. He wasn't sure if it was actually true, but often enough, complaints he'd receive would always say so. Nevertheless, this young man wasn't affected at all, and even got 2 rounds of good fortune. Since both tokens were fortunate, he carelessly selected one. As the cart bumped and swayed along, Shilian exclaimed in admiration, "My friend, your luck is not too shabby." Sanlong tossed the fortune teller container back, and said with a smile, "Really? I also think my luck's not too shabby. It's always been so." Hearing him say it has always been so, Shilian thought that the difference between 2 people couldn't be more different than heaven and earth. Because he's always had such bad luck. Out of nowhere, they again heard the wail of the ghosts. "We found them! They're here! Everyone over here! That damned Daoshi is here!" As ghosts' heads appeared one by one, Shilian remarked, "It still seems we've picked the wrong path." The effects of the talismans long expired, so they were once again surrounded. The mob of ghosts and ghouls had to be at least 100 or so in numbers. They barricaded them, and this barrier was several layers thick, with their numbers continuously increasing. He wasn't sure why there'd be so many inhumane creatures gathered here, but there was no time to be thinking about that now. Shilian gently said, Those that I've offended through my actions, I humbly ask for your generosity and forgiveness. A headless ghost spat. Ha! Rotten Daoshi, you should have been generous first. Back over there, weren't you people the ones who dispersed the ghost fires? Shi Lian innocently said, truth be told, it wasn't us. I am but a mere scrap collector. Stop lying already. How can you be a scrap collector? You're clearly a Daoshi. And besides you, isn't there another Daoshi around who would do such a thing? Daoshi aren't the only ones who can disperse ghost fires, Shi Lian said in reply. Then who else could it be? A ghost? Shi Lian quietly slipped his hand into his sleeve. It's not impossible. Damn Daoshi, you... The ghost, who had emitted laughter loud enough to shake the heavens, suddenly stammered, unable to continue. Shi Lian prompted, what about me? Just as he asked, the ghost seemed to have lost all ability for speech, and even the stammering stopped. They gawked at Shi Lian, either with dropped jaws or tightly sealed lips, as if they'd seen something profoundly terrifying. Many of the headless prisoner ghosts had been scared to the point of dropping their heads. Shi Lian asked in a probing manner, you guys? Unexpectedly, before he'd even finished asking, the crowd of ghosts dispersed like flustered birds, fleeing in all directions, as though a whirlwind had hustled through the scattered clouds. No way, Shi Lian said, stunned. He hadn't even pulled out the handful of talismans he was holding, hidden in his sleeve. Could they have discovered the talismans? Were they that astute? Besides, the talismans weren't even that powerful. Shi Lian was thoroughly perplexed. What were they frightened by? Was it really him? Or was it something behind him? With that in mind, he turned around to see what was behind him. There was only the passed-out cart owner behind him, as well as the teen in red, still sitting leisurely with his chin propped on his hand. Seeing him look back, San Long faintly smiled again. He set down his hand and said, Dao Zhang is so valiant and formidable, those ghosts were all scared away by you. Shi Lian also smiled back. Is that so? I've never realized I could be this formidable. After that, he tugged on the reins a few times, and the cart's wheels began to roll once more. The rest of the journey was smooth sailing. In less than an hour, the ox cart slowly crawled out of the forest, onto a wide and even path in the hills. Puji village rested at the base of the slope, warm and glowing. It was indeed a good fortune path, equipped with surprises, but no danger. The night wind blew past as Shi Lian looked back again. San Long seemed to be in a particularly good mood. He laid down and adjusted his arms to cushion his head within his hands as he observed the turn of the moon. Under the soft moonlight, that young man's appearance looked almost surreal. After a moment of hesitation, Shi Lian burst into a smile and called out, My friend! What? San Long asked. Have you had your fortune told before? San Long turned his head. No, I haven't. Then, Shi Lian asked, do you want me to tell yours? While looking at him, San Long smiled and said, You want to tell my fortune? Yeah, a little, he admitted. San Long lightly nodded. All right. He sat up, inclining his body towards Shi Lian. How are you going to do it? Shi Lian replied, Palm reading. Is that all right? Hearing his answer, San Long's lips curved upwards in a smile, the meaning behind it indiscernible. Sure, he agreed, reaching out his left hand. The fingers on his left hand were long and slender with defined knuckles, beautiful to look at. It wasn't beautiful in a fragile sense, but attractive in the way of hidden strength. No one would wish to have these pairs of hands choking them to death. Shi Lian remembered the way San Long had reacted to his touch from before and made a mental note not to make any direct contact with his person. Thus, he did not directly touch his hand, but only looked downwards in observation. The white moonlight was neither dim nor bright. Shi Lian examined the hand for some time, the ox cart slowly making its way through the mountain road with the wheels and the wooden shafts creaking. San Long asked, How is it? After a short pause, Shi Lian slowly replied, You have a very good life. San Long said, Oh? In which way is it good? Shi Lian raised his head, softly saying, You are tenacious, extremely dedicated, and despite many bitter encounters with frustrations and dashed hopes, you've stayed true to your heart. More often than not, your misfortunes will turn into blessings, calamity to prosperity. You will continue to have good fortune. My friend, your future is radiant and will blossom spectacularly. All the things he said were made up on the spot, so they were complete nonsense. Shilian didn't know how to read palms. Previously, when he'd fallen, there was a period of time when he'd frequently regretted not learning palmistry and physiognomy from the ministers in the palace. If he had, he wouldn't have had to compete with other street entertainers who liked to smash rocks on their bare chest during the times when he was fighting to survive in the mortal realm. The only reason he'd asked to see Sanlang's palms wasn't to tell his fate. It was to confirm if he had palm lines and fingerprints. If he had oh no, his fingertips fingerprints. Common ghosts could create a flesh body to pose as a human, but the finer details on the human body, like palm lines, fingerprints, and hair ends, couldn't be replicated to that extent of detail. And yet the young man's body had only no signs of enchantment. There were no further clues that could be detected. In addition, his palm lines were very distinct. If he was a ghost or a ghoul in disguise, he would have to be at least the Wrath rank to have been able to create such a flawless disguise. But if he was a ghost king of that caliber, why would he choose to come ride an ox cart with him on a little mountain village to kill time? Just like how the heavenly officials in heaven were occupied with so many important matters and were slammed with work day after day without rest, to the point it could be said their feet never touched the ground with how much they ran about, ghost kings would be just as busy. Why would a ghost king hang out with you in an ox cart? I wonder why he would. Shilian pretended to be very confident and sure with his lies, forcing himself to continue with more until he finally couldn't bullshit anymore. For the entire duration, Sanlang steadily watched him, listening to all his rubbish while quietly laughing. His laughter was enough to make one wonder. Oh, he definitely knows why Shilian was looking at his hands. Oh, you can tell he's so enchanted with everything this guy does. Oh my god, these two are gonna kill me! And I've already read this book. Ugh. Anything else, Sanlang asked. Shilian dreaded the thought of having to continue his bullshit. Is there anything else you want me to read? Sanlang replied, since it's fortune-telling, shouldn't you tell me about my predestined soulmate? Shilian coughed lightly and solemnly said, my knowledge is limited. I don't know how to read about fated soulmates, but in my opinion, you have no need to worry. Sanlang raised an eyebrow. Why do you think I have no need to worry about it? Shilian smiled. Surely there must be many girls who like you. Sanlang replied, why do you think there must be many girls who would like me? Shilian was about to go with the flow of the conversation and answer when he realized the kiddo was scheming to get Shilian to willingly compliment him. Shilian felt rather helpless, yet found it pretty funny. Unsure of what to say, he pinched his brow before he uttered in a defeated tone, Sanlang, ah. Right, adding at the end, I think it's kind of like a teasing tone. I think of it kind of like how my name is Amanda, but people would call me Mandy to tease me. This was the first time Shilian had called him by the name Sanlang. When the young man heard it, he laughed aloud and finally stopped teasing him. At this moment, the ox, panting for breath, pulled into the village. Turning around, Shilian supported himself and quickly got off the cart. Sanlang jumped off as well. As Shilian lifted his head, he realized earlier Sanlang had been lazily reclining on the cart the entire ride. But now, standing next to him, he noticed the young man was actually much taller than him, and their line of sight wasn't even close to being even. Sanlang stood in front of the cart and stretched. Shilian asked, Sanlang, which way will you be heading? Sanlang sighed. I don't know. I'll probably sleep on the streets or find some mountain cave and make do. This manipulative little idiot. Shilian replied, that won't do. Sanlang stretched his arms. There's nothing else I can do, and I have nowhere to go. He glanced over and laughed again. Thanks for telling me my fortune. I humbly receive the blessings you've told me and hope it may come true. May we meet again. Hearing him bring up his fortune-telling, Shilian's face reddened with shame. When Sanlang turned to leave, Shilian hurriedly said, Wait, if you don't mind, would you like to come stay at my monastery? Sanlang's footsteps halted as he half-turned his body. May I? Shilian said, The house wasn't originally mine to begin with. I've heard that... Oh, stupid thing keeps jumping. I've heard that previously, passerbys would use it as a shelter for the night. It's just that with the state of it, it might be worse than you imagine, so you might not be able to stand it. If this teen was really a rich young master who'd run away from home, he couldn't just leave him be unsupervised. Shi Lian felt rather skeptical on how he only ate half a bun for the duration of the entire day. If young people took advantage of their good health like this, sooner or later they'd surely end up passed out on the streets. Listening to him talk, San Long turned around without answering and walked up in front of him before leaning forward. Shi Lian still hadn't figured out what he wanted and only felt the distance between the two of them had shrunk. He was a little overwhelmed, unable to do anything to ward him off. The young man took a few steps back, revealing he'd only taken the large bag of scraps Shi Lian had been carrying on his back. Well then, let's go. Oh my god, these two are so cute and precious, and it hurts me. It hurts me so much how cute and precious they are. We're gonna keep going. I have to run and refill my water bottle, but we're at least gonna read this next chapter because it's killing me. We'll be right back. Alright. I already can't deal with the guys in Untamed. Now I gotta deal with these two. Right? And just wait. I've heard they're adapting this into an anime. It's gonna be even more unbearable. All of her books are like this. I've yet to be as impressed with a different... There's some other books in the genre that I've read that have been good, but none of them has stood out as much as this woman's work. They're amazing. She's very, very good at the tension and the tenderness between the main characters. Like, the magnetism between them is so powerful. And I haven't really found another book that matches it. Like, there's been really good writing, there's been entertaining stuff in it, but not quite to this level. And she's currently writing her 4th book, which I'm excited for. And after this book, I will probably read another of hers because I really enjoy her work. And her 1st book is just so fun and goofy. It's not her strongest, but it's her first work. And you can, looking back at her works and reading them in order, it's just lovely to see how she's evolved. This is her most modern work, and she's clearly peaked with this story, and I can't wait to see what she does with her next book. Chapter 16. Shi Lian was startled to find the young man, although slim and slender, helped him carry his enormous bag of scraps with calm, collected ease. He couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. San Long strode forward, already steps ahead of him. Shi Lian made to follow, but suddenly remembered the old cart driver, still lying unconscious in the cart. He doubled back and tapped him back to consciousness, and repeatedly warned him not to speak of anything that had happened tonight to anyone. Having witnessed his abilities, how could the old man dare to disagree with him? Vigorously nodding his head, he said he wouldn't dream of it. The old man then pulled on the reins and hurried home. What was left on the cart now was a old rolled-up bamboo mat, which Shi Lian carried on his back. When he looked back again, San Long was already making his way leisurely up the hill, single-handedly holding the bag of scraps that was slung over his shoulder. Upon arrival, they stood in front of the crookedly sitting Pukui Monastery. I read it wrong. San Long dipped his head in a fit of laughter, as though he'd seen something amusing. As Shi Lian approached, he found he was looking at the "Decrepit House, Please Donate" sign. He coughed lightly and said, "See, this is it. This is why I said you might not be able to use it." San Long replied, "This is quite all right." Previously, it had always been Shi Lian telling people, "It's all right, it's okay." Today was the first time he'd heard those words spoken back to him, leaving him with an indescribable feeling. Puqui's monastery door had already long rotted, so Shi Lian took it down and replaced it with a curtain. Lifting a corner, he stepped forward and said, "Come in." San Long followed close behind and entered. The furnishings in this little wooden house could be taken in with a single glance. There was only a long rectangular offering table, 2 small wooden stools, a small praying mat, and a donation box. Taking the things San Long had been holding, Shi Lian began unloading things. The fortune-telling container, an incense burner, a calligraphy brush, paper, and other miscellaneous items, before putting them in their appropriate places on the offering table. Lighting up a red candle someone had offhandedly tossed at him when collecting scraps, the room became immediately illuminated in light. San Long casually picked up the fortune-telling container and shook it before placing it down. He asked, "So, is there a bed?" Shi Lian turned around. He wordlessly set down the bamboo mat he'd been carrying on his back and showed it to him. San Long raised an eyebrow. "There's only one?" Shi Lian had only run into the young man when he was on his way back from town, so naturally he hadn't thought to bought another. "If you don't mind squishing with me tonight, we can share," he suggested. San Long replied, "That works." I bet that works! Shi Lian took the broom and swept the floor again while San Long wandered around the monastery. "Daozang, Gaga, aren't you missing something in this temple of yours?" Shi Lian had finished sweeping and was crouching down on the floor so he could lay out the bamboo mat. Hearing this, he asked as he spread the mat out, "I think besides followers, there shouldn't be anything else lacking." San Long also crouched down, one hand supporting his chin as he asked, "What about the imagery of the god?" It was only because of his reminder that Shi Lian abruptly remembered he'd forgotten the most important item, the god's image. He could just sit on the shelf. A monastery without the god's image was not a monastery at all. Although he himself, the god, was there, he couldn't be expected to sit on the offering table every day. What you want to bet they definitely did that? No, I'm not gonna My mind's going places. After mulling it over, Shi Lian found the solution. "Earlier, I'd purchased a calligraphy brush and some paper. I'll draw a portrait to hang up tomorrow." To draw a portrait of himself, by himself, for himself, to hang in his own temple. If word of this was to spread to heaven, he reckoned he would probably be made fun of for another decade or so. But to have an accurate statue carved would waste precious resources and time. So, between that and being ridiculed, Shi Lian would rather be made fun of for 10 years instead. Unexpectedly, San Long spoke up. "Drawing? I know how. Want some help?" Startled, Shi Lian laughed and said, "Then I must first thank you. But I'm afraid you might not know how to draw the Crown Prince of Xianli. After all, almost all his statues and portraits had been burnt 800 years ago. Regardless of the few that still remain, not many people would have seen them." Yet San Long replied, "Of course I know. When we were sitting on the cart earlier, didn't we bring up His Highness the Crown Prince?" Shi Lian did recall such an event. Indeed, while on the road here, he'd said you've probably not heard of him, but San Long had not replied. Hearing him say this, it was a bit surprising. Shi Lian finished spreading the mat. Straightening up, he said, "Could it be that you really do know him?" San Long sat down on top of the mat. "I do." "I bet you do." This young man's appearance and tone while speaking were quite interesting. He often smiled, but it was hard to tell whether those smiles were genuine and sincere, or in mockery of the other party's intellect. Throughout their journey on the road, Shi Lian had listened to him talk on everything under the sun, so he was rather interested in knowing the other's appraisal. He seated himself next to the teen and asked, "Towards the Crown Prince of Xianli, San Long, what are your thoughts about him?" The two of them sat face to face under the flickering flame of the red candles. With San Long's back toward the light, his black eyes were cast in the shadows, rendering his facial expression to be indiscernible. After a short while, he replied, "I think Jun Wu must have really disliked him." Shi Lian didn't think it would be that kind of answer. A bit taken aback, he inquired, "Why do you think so?" San Long replied, "Why else would he be thrown from the heavens twice?" Hearing this, Shi Lian smiled faintly, thinking, "Indeed, the reasoning of youth." He lowered his head, slowly unfastening his sash, while saying, This, and whether to like or hate, has nothing to do with one another. In this world there are many matters to which one can't simply explain with just a like or dislike. San Long said, "Oh." Shi Lian spun around, tugging off his white boots before speaking again. "Besides, if one did something wrong, one must be punished for it. The Heavenly Emperor was only carrying out his duty both times." With a non-committal regard, San Long said, "Perhaps." Polite disagreement. On his end, Shi Lian took off his outer clothes and neatly stacked the folded clothing, readying to place them on the offerings table. Shi Lian had wanted to speak more on the topic when he turned his head and discovered how San Long's gaze was locked onto his foot. Oh, yeah. The gaze looked bizarre. It could be described as ice cold, yet it could also be described as scaldingly piercing. It could be said as burning hot, yet also it emitted cool intent. Shi Lian tilted his head down to look and immediately understood. The young man was looking at the black cursed manacle wrapped around his right ankle. The first cursed manacle was firmly wrapped around his neck, while the second was tightly bound to his ankle. Both manacles were placed in inconvenient areas with no way to hide them. In the past, if others were to ask about them, Shi Lian randomly made up an answer and said they were necessary for practicing his art. But if it was San Long who asked, the boy might not be so easily fooled. However, San Long only stared at his ankle for a moment and did not make any comments. Shi Lian also didn't want to entangle himself on the topic and proceeded to lie down. The young man obediently laid down beside him with his clothes still on. Guessing he was probably unused to sleeping on the floor undressed, Shi Lian thought to himself he should really get a bed. "Let's rest," he said. With a light blow, the red candle's flame was extinguished. The following morning, when Shi Lian opened his eyes, he noticed that San Long was not lying next to him. Lifting his head to look around, his heart suddenly shook. Unexpectedly, above the offerings table was a portrait. The portrait was of a man clad in splendid clothing and a golden mask, wielding a sword in one hand and a flower in the other. The vigor in each brushstroke was excellent, and the colors used exquisite. This was, in fact, a portrait of the Xianli crown prince who pleased the gods. It had been many years since Shi Lian had last seen a painting as this, so he stared at it blankly for a while before finally getting up. After dressing himself, he pulled aside the curtain. San Long was outside the monastery, resting in a patch of shade. The teenager spun a broomstick between his hands for fun, whilst gazing up at the sky and looking infinitely bored. The young man didn't seem fond of sunlight. From the way he gazed at the sky, it seemed as if he was contemplating how to yank down the sun and stomp it to mush. Outside the door lay a pile of fallen leaves, all neatly swept. Shi Lian went out the door and asked, "Did you rest well last night?" Still leaning against the wall, San Long turned his head and answered, "Not bad." Shi Lian walked over and took the broom from his hand. "San Long, was the portrait in the monastery drawn by you?" "You drew it very well," he said. Although he didn't speak, the corners of San Long's mouth quirked upwards. Unsure if it was due to the way he'd slept the night before, his hair seemed more lopsided and disheveled than yesterday, complete with loose strands here and there, carelessly messy. But in reality, it was very good-looking. Carelessly disheveled but not disorderly, it had a touch of charm. Shi Lian pointed to his own hair. "Want me to help you?" San Long nodded and went back inside the monastery with Shi Lian. When he sat down, Shi Lian untied his hair and held it in his hand, calmly and carefully examining it. Even if the palm lines and fingerprints were recreated perfectly, ghosts and ghouls would always slip up on one part. A living person's hair was numerous in number and rather uncountable, each strand so fine and distinct. Consequently, many ghouls and ghosts' fake skin ended up having hair that looked like a black cloud, or with strands glued together like strips of fabric, or they would simply forgo it altogether and take on the appearance of being bald. Last night, Shi Lian was able to confirm that San Long's fingerprints and palm lines existed, and thus had initially let down his guard. However, when he saw the portrait this morning, he couldn't help but feel suspicious again. How could a normal person have drawn this painting? But when his fingers gently stroked through San Long's hair, subtly examining it, he discovered the young man's black hair was smooth and long without any abnormalities. After a while, perhaps because his actions were ticklish, San Long laughed once more. He slightly tilted his head and glanced at him from the corner of his eye before saying, "Guga, are you trying to help me tie my hair?" Or did you have something else in mind you'd rather do? With his long hair down in a loose manner, it didn't detract from San Long's beauty, and instead added a devilish aura. The question seemed to be teasing. Smiling, Shi Lian said, all right, before he swiftly went about tying his hair. Who knew after he finished tying his hair, San Long took a look at his reflection in the water basin nearby, before turning back and raising an eyebrow at Shi Lian. Seeing his reaction, Shi Lian gently coughed again. Before, his hair was lopsided. After retying and adjusting it, it was still crooked. Even though San Long hadn't said a word and was just looking at him in this manner, Shi Lian still felt like it had been a few hundred years or so since he'd felt this embarrassed. Dropping his hands, he was about to say to San Long, come here, let's try again, when suddenly he heard a loud outbreak of noise coming from outside. Sounds of footsteps came from all directions, along with a few shouts of, Great Immortal! Shi Lian was startled upon hearing this and rushed outside, only to see many people blocking the front entrance to his monastery. Each one of them was red-faced with excitement. The village chief rushed forward and seized his hand before saying, Great Immortal, to have a living god come to our village is really too wonderful. Shi Lian, huh? The rest of the villagers had already surrounded him. Great Immortal, welcome to Pukui, and thank you for settling down here. Great Immortal, could you bless me and let me find a wife? Great Immortal, can you bless one family member of mine to hurry up and give birth to a child? Great Immortal, I have fresh water chestnuts here. Do you want to eat them? While you eat them, could you bless me with a good harvest this year? The villagers were all too enthusiastic, cornering him from all sides while forcing Shi Lian to continuously retreat. His heart was crying out bitterly. The old man from last night was sure big-mouthed. Despite plainly stressing the importance of not uttering a word, at the break of dawn, the whole village already knew. The villagers didn't know which god the monastery was devoted to at the beginning, but they all firmly requested to burn an incense stick. In any case, no matter which god it was, a god is still a god all the same, and praying to them wouldn't do any harm. What Shi Lian had originally expected was that the monastery would be completely deserted without a single soul in sight, and that throughout the year there wouldn't even be a handful of people who'd approach his door. Therefore, he'd only prepared a small bundle of spooled incense as a gesture of goodwill. Who would expect that this event could instantly sweep his entire stock clean? The little censer was filled full and thoroughly, densely packed with incense stuck haphazardly in all directions. The scent of incense permeated the air, and due to how long it had been since he'd inhaled such a scent, Shi Lian actually choked on it a few times. While choking on a few mouthfuls, he spoke, Fellow countrymen, I really can't bless you with wealth and treasures, really. Please, by all means, don't pray for wealth here. There may be unforeseen consequences. I'm sorry, please, don't ask about marriage either. No, I can't bless you in regards to bearing and raising children. San Long had also stopped minding his crookedly tied hair and sat right beside the donation box, with a hand propping his chin and with the other lazily throwing chestnuts into his mouth as he ate. Several village women caught sight of him, their faces blushing over like crimson clouds before they asked Shi Lian, do you... Do you all hear my... I don't have a phone call. Alright, let me check real quick. Jeff says that my mother's calling me. It'd be funny if y'all have better hearing through the computer than I do. Jeff was right. All right. Several village women caught sight of San Long, their faces blushing over like crimson clouds, before they asked Shi Lian, do you... Even though he didn't know what they were about to ask, Shi Lian's intuition told him he had to stop them immediately, so he said, no! I wonder what he was gonna... obviously something romantic or sexual about the two of them, but I'm curious what the question would have been. With great difficulty, the crowd finally dispersed, leaving the offering table filled with fruits, vegetables, and white rice, noodles, and other items. For better or worse, he had at last received a wave of offerings. Shi Lian swept out the litter the villagers had left outside. San Long followed him out, saying, "The incense is quite nice." Shi Lian swept while shaking his head. Under normal circumstances, 10 days to half a month would pass without a single person coming in for a blessing. How could this be? San Long asked. Shi Lian glanced at him, smiling. Now that I think about it, perhaps San Long's luck has rubbed off on me a bit. As he said this, he remembered he'd wanted to change the door curtain. Thus, tugging out a new curtain from within his sleeve, he hung it up on the door. He took 2 steps to look it over, when suddenly he noticed that San Long had stopped in his tracks. Shi Lian turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" Only to see San Long staring at the curtain, a pensive expression on his face. Following his line of sight, Shi Lian saw he was eyeing the spells written on the curtain. The talisman was something he'd casually drawn some time ago, and on it were spells upon spells layering one another. Its defense was very strong. Its purpose was originally for warding off evil, and it could repel the advances of evil outside, preventing them from entering. Yet since this was written by Shi Lian himself, would this also work in attracting misfortune at the same time? There was no way of knowing. However, since the monastery didn't even have a front door, it would be safer to have a row of spells drawn onto the curtain. Seeing how the young man stood in front of the curtain motionless, something stirred within Shi Lian. San Long, what if by drawing this talisman, the teenager would be restricted at the door and prevented from entering? We're gonna call it there. That's the end of the chapter. But we got a lot of good interaction with our boy. They're so cute and sweet together. They're so funny. They're very gentle, I think, like very gentle with each other in a really sweet way. It's very fun. I really like their relationship, and it's only gonna get better from here. We still have like 250 chapters. It's a long book. So brace yourselves. We just finished chapter 16, so there's still miles to go before we sleep. And they've only just started talking to each other. Like I said, probably no fatal frame today because I have to run some errands. Some things have come up, so we'll see if maybe a late one if I finish and get back home in time. But for now, I'm going to call it a day. If you like what I do, support the channel. For as little as 99 cents a month, you get cool bonuses. We hang out and do private streams and stuff. You get extra videos other people don't get, free content, all kinds of stuff. Links in the description where you can learn more about that. Follow me on social media. Join the Discord if you want to watch TV with us. We're actually watching the live-action adaptation of a different book by this lady called The Untamed, which is super fun, so do that. And we'll be back with more of this book next week. So I'll see you guys then. Bye.